All right. It is now the 21st century, your century. Mine only a little bit, yours a lot of it. 21st century, the election of 2000. Some people say that's the end of the 20th century. I don't know. Okay, so the election of 2000, I think this is episode 41. The election of 2000 illustrates the weaknesses of the electoral college system, the outdated voting methods still employed by states, and the elevated rancor or hatred of party politics in the modern era. Sadly, this was in 2000, and there was party politics, but now party politics are worse than they have ever been. And the division and the derision in our country is at an all-time high. And this is 20 minutes after an incredibly controversial election. 20 years. Or 20 minutes. Democrats chose Vice President Al Gore, who benefited from Clinton's prosperity, but was also hurt by Clinton's scandals, i.e. Monica Lewinsky. Ralph Nader is the reason that Al Gore loses. Al Gore 100% wins if Ralph Nader had not run for election. He's a third-party candidate, and I think that he takes 2% of the Democratic vote, but the election in Florida is won by 537 votes. 537 human beings, 537 people who voted is how, the Supreme Court decides the 2000 election. But the difference in votes was by 537. Ralph Nader got way more than that in Florida. And so if he had not run, Al Gore would have won the state of Florida and therefore won the election. Republicans chose George W. Bush. Bush called for big tax cuts for all, but especially the rich. Now remember, Bill Clinton has just balanced the budget just before that. And indeed, W is going to unbalance the budget by giving lots of that money away to the rich. Huge tax cuts for the rich. Al Gore favored smaller tax cuts, paying down the debt, and supporting Social Security and Medicare.
Mr. Hilton, you're needed in the front office, please. Mr. Hilton.
A close finish was expected, but it was much closer than experts predicted, reminiscent of the Hayes-Tilden presidency, which we just talked about, the standoff of 1876. As you know, the Compromise of 1877, also known as the Great Betrayal, as in the betrayal of African Americans when they took the troops out of the Deep South. And now also, this year, this election just a few weeks ago, also it harkens back to the Compromise of 1877. Florida, the fourth largest electoral votes, effectively had a tie. Bush was ahead by only a few hundred votes. So they demand a recount. They have these paper ballots, and you have to punch a little stylus into a hole in the card, which you're going to see this in a second, the butterfly ballot. And so it knocks out the piece of paper in there. But as the voting machines got more and more packed, when you punched the little piece of paper, it wouldn't necessarily tear it off like it had for the earlier voters because there was paper underneath there jamming it up. And so as a result, people's votes weren't necessarily counted, and they referred to that as a hanging chad, that it was only barely hanging on, and so they were saying, well, maybe they didn't mean to vote for that person. It was crazy. Florida state law required a recount. You must do a recount. Many irregularities were discovered, and voter confusion was evident. The margin of victory for all of Florida was 537 votes, and Buchanan received over 2,000 in just Palm Beach alone. Patrick Buchanan is a right-wing Christian conservative, and Palm Beach County, where I used to teach, is 50% Jewish. And so they know that Patrick Buchanan got way more votes, 2,000, way more votes in Palm Beach County than he should have got. The reason they know that is because every other Florida county, the mail-in votes were the same percentage as the votes in on election day or before election day, when people voted in person. They were all the same. They're the same percentage for mail-in as they were for people who voted in person. But in Palm Beach County, the people that went and voted in person and pushed this stylus in, many more of them accidentally voted for Buchanan. And that would have changed everything. This is because it was called the Butterfly Ballot. We talked about it. This woman named Teresa Lepore, This woman named Teresa Lepore made a butterfly ballot. The problem is, everybody thought that these were the only presidential candidates, but these were also presidential candidates. And so there was a book, and when you went to vote, you would open it up like this, like a book, and then you would vote. But the problem is that she put presidential candidates on both sides. And so George W. Bush, you pushed the first hole. Nobody messed that up. Oh, he's the first one? I pushed the first hole. No problem. But a lot of people believed that they pushed for Al Gore, and they wanted to vote for Al Gore, so they pushed the second one, not understanding that the second one was for Pat Buchanan, not for Al Gore. For Al Gore, you would have had to push the third button, and as a result, a lot of people believed that they voted for Pat Buchanan. Where'd he go? For Pat Buchanan by accident, because they thought that Al Gore was the second hole that they were supposed to push. Florida. So what courts decided on December 8th, remember election days like November 3rd, November 4th, November 7th, something like that. I don't know what it was that year. It's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. That's election day every time. The first Tuesday after the first Monday. I don't know why they would do that. It's weird. Anyway, on December 8th, about a month later, the Florida Supreme Court, by a 4-3 vote, ordered a statewide manual recount. On December 9th, the U.S. Supreme Court voted 5-4 to end the Florida recount. So even though the Florida Supreme Court ordered a recount, the United States Supreme Court ended the recount, and during the recount, while it was going on, more votes kept coming up for Gore than they did for Bush. And you should know that the governor of Florida was Jeb Bush, George W. Bush's brother. And so, anyway, it was a very iffy, strange thing. The courts decided who won that election by ending the recount and therefore declaring George W. Bush the winner. In Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court declared the Florida recount unconstitutional, and they stopped the count. At least 2,000 of Buchanan's 3,424 Palm Beach County votes were meant for Gore. Gore's total gain with the overvotes might have been as much as 8,600. So he might have had 8,600 more votes than he had. And remember, the election was won by Bush by 537. However, what you should know is they know that by comparing in all of the counties of Florida, the mail-in ballots with the in-person ballots. In every other county, they were the similar percentage. But in Palm Beach County, the mail-in ballots were way lower than the number of in-person votes because of that specific county. Palm Beach County is the only one that had this butterfly ballot. Teresa Lepore was the supervisor of elections, and she made that butterfly ballot, which was terrible. And as a result, people accidentally voted for Buchanan. And in theory, Al Gore would have been president, and everything would be different. We've talked about it. Whether it is one president or another president, this election, whether it was Biden or Trump, everything is going to be different as a result of who is in the presidency. Same when JFK was assassinated, when Lincoln was assassinated, our whole country, things changed every time. After several weeks, Florida declared Bush the victor, even though the recount was incomplete. Debbie's brother, Jeb Bush, was the Florida governor. Might have something to do with it or not. I guess it depends on your perspective. So then we have a new century, the 21st century, your century. W is not our most eloquent president. In fact, his strange comments are known as Bushisms. There's so many. They underestimated me. They used to be called malapropisms, or Archie Bunker, a TV show from the 60s, bunkerisms, where he used the wrong word for what he actually meant to say. This one says, our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we. Oops. I know how hard it is for you to put food on your family. Oops. There's a lot of them. Rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? Oops. He wasn't a very eloquent man. Neither in French, nor in English, nor in Mexican. Spanish, not Mexican. You teach a child to read and he or her will be able to pass a literacy test. Of course, it would be he or she. I've heard he's been called Bush's poodle. He's bigger than that. This is one of the most famous ones. There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you, shame on you, fool me, you can't get fooled again. It's a very common, famous phrase, and that's not it. We'll let our friends be the peacekeepers, and the great country called America will be the pacemakers. Obviously misspoke. So he has a lot of things that were accidentally misspoken. Families is where our nation finds hope, where wings take dream. Okay, and then Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader is the third party candidate, as I told you. He had a very significant number of votes in the presidential election, an election that was this tight, 97,000, almost 500 votes. And if he hadn't been a third party candidate, then Al Gore would have absolutely won the election. That's the same thing, if I remember correctly, that happened to H.W. Bush when Ross Perot ran against him and took a huge number of votes. H.W. Bush was actually a good president. He would have been reelected if it hadn't been for Ross Perot. Unfortunately for him, this guy Ross Perot decided to run, and that was good news for Clinton. So this recount is what's going on. Gore actually got more popular votes, but lost the critical electoral vote, 266 to Bush's 271. Same thing in 2016, Hillary Clinton got more of the popular vote, but still lost the election. This time, Biden has more of the popular vote, and he did finally win the election. If Gore won his home state of Tennessee, he would have won the election. Oops, like his own home state. All he had to do was win his own home state, and he didn't. The W years at home, George W. Bush. You see him a lot of times in a cowboy hat as well. He now currently lives on his ranch in Texas. George W. Bush was a socially conservative president whose tax policies promoted business growth, but at the expense of the middle class, which ultimately contributed to the Great Recession in 2008. Bush took office talking up his Texas upbringing and deep Christian faith, but rarely mentioned his family's wealth and power. Everybody talks about that he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth because he came from money. And of course, his father was president. Do I think Mason, get off of there, Mason. Sorry, Mason. Do I think faith will be an important part of being a good president? Yes, I do. Conservative, very conservative. W. Bush supported faith-based social welfare programs, and therefore he pulled financial support from organizations and countries allowing abortion because he's pro-life. Bush opposed stem cell research, which comes from fetuses, fetuses that have been aborted, which had great medical possibilities, arguing an embryo was a small person and therefore you shouldn't be able to use the stem cells from this fetus. It's still today a very contentious issue, also today. Bush angered environmentalists with his policies and his denial of global warming. Some of the scientists, I believe, haven't they been changing their opinion a little bit on global warming? There's a lot of differing opinions, and before we react, I think it's best to have the full accounting, full understanding of what's taking place. How likely is it that some scientists have falsified global warming research? People are saying that they are lying about it. 40% say it's very likely, and 29% said it's somewhat likely. So that misinformation. This is global land ocean temperatures. For me, this is one of the major reasons why I am sure that global warming is happening. Ocean temperatures can't rise without the outside air being heated. In 1880, this is it. And by the 21st century, this is how high ocean temperatures are. Right now in the Arctic, it's literally a blast furnace. It's 10, 15 degrees Celsius higher than it should be. Total budget deficit and an increase in national debt. So again, from 2001, Clinton had balanced the budget, so we have more money than we have debt, and then Bush gave it all away, and in 2008 is the Great Recession. That is a result of this housing bubble and the banking crisis. Bush cut taxes by 1.3 trillion. He cut taxes by 1.3 trillion, and Clinton's budget surplus has turned into a $400 billion deficit by 2004. So he had a deficit when he came in, a surplus when he came in, and then he had a deficit 8 years later by a long shot. John Kerry. In 2004, Bush's re-election was challenged by Democrat John Kerry. He makes himself look like an idiot by windsurfing, and that's one of the political commercials that he has is of him windsurfing, and he just looked weird and stupid doing it. Plus, it seemed very Richie Rich that he was doing it because most people don't have windsurfers, and he didn't seem very relatable to the common person. He is very rich. His wife is Teresa Heinz, and she owns Heinz Ketchup. And you know how much people buy Heinz Ketchup still today. So he married a very wealthy woman. So he's very rich. Bush won with a surprisingly strong showing, a popular vote of 60 million to Kerry's 57 million, 286 electoral votes to Kerry's 252, which is closer than it is, of course, now with the election now. Now it's 306 to 232, just like it was 4 years ago against Clinton. And then Hurricane Katrina in 1998 was the first hurricane that I remember being a part of when I lived in Florida, and that was Hurricane Andrew, and it hit in Homestead just south of Miami and was devastating. It literally decimated the entire city. And then the next big hurricane that I can remember is Katrina. Katrina came through us actually in South Florida as a tropical storm. It came straight across us in Palm Beach County, but it was a tropical storm, and then it got really, really big in the Gulf of Mexico, just like it always does because the water is so much warmer in the Gulf of Mexico, so hurricanes heat up faster. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in the biggest natural disaster in U.S. history. 1,836 people died, and New Orleans was largely destroyed because remember, New Orleans is in a bowl, and so when that hurricane hit, it flooded a lot, and a lot of people drowned when it overwhelmed the levees. So that's Lake Pontchartrain. This is New Orleans, and so it overwhelmed the levees, and it went past. This is New Orleans. Low. These are the levees, and it went over the levees. So that's New Orleans. This is what it did to the Superdome, where the Saints play football. And that's the lower 9th Ward, I believe, before, and then as it's getting flooded. It devastated them. That's New Orleans. Bush is extremely ridiculed for this picture because he's in a plane flying over top of New Orleans looking out, and people were upset that he should have been down on the ground and talking to people. And so he got ridiculed for that picture there specifically. The Bush administration mismanaged the response to the hurricane. They were unprepared and slow to send relief. They finally sent in the National Guard to help, but it was days and days later, and people were starting to starve, and they couldn't get out of the flooded areas, and they couldn't swim, and their houses were flooded, and they were stuck on top of roofs, and they couldn't get off, and it was days before people came to save them. It was kind of crazy. In September 2008, the U.S. economy declined sharply, which was caused by high oil prices, inflation, and the housing bubble bursting. What that means is that the prices of houses was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We bought our house for $280,000 in West Palm Beach, and at its height, I think it was close to $480,000 I wish I'd have sold it then. I didn't know. But it was worth $200,000 more. It almost doubled in equity, and then it crashed. So we didn't get any of that equity anymore. Bush supported the Troubled Asset Relief Program, known as TARP, to bail out the big banks that were on the verge of collapse. A lot of people were furious because it didn't bail out the human beings or the people. It bailed out the big banks. And so people still had these mortgages that were underwater, meaning that they had bought houses at that higher end. They bought them for $300,000, $400,000, and then their houses were worth $200,000. But they had paid for them $400,000, and now they're only worth $200,000. So a lot of people just left their houses behind because they were worthless. They couldn't afford to pay them anymore. The Great Recession almost guaranteed Obama's victory in 2008 and further diminished Bush's legacy. War on terror, sadly. This, of course, is 9/11. George W. Bush's response to the 9/11 attacks was to wage a war on terror. While the war in Afghanistan justifiably sought to destroy al-Qaeda's base of operations, the subsequent war in Iraq largely derailed the president's foreign policy agenda. Afghanistan is where al-Qaeda was from, and that's who we blame for the war. But then later when we invaded Iraq, they tried to make it sound like that was also the reason to blame for the war, and most people believe it was not. Supposedly there were weapons of mass destruction which were never found. And then, of course, the disastrous and horrifying day, September 11th. September 11, 2001, militant Muslim radicals attacked America using hijacked passenger planes as guided missiles. There were 4 planes in the air at whatever different times, and 2 of them flew in the World Trade Center. One of them was over Pennsylvania when it was crashed, and then the last one was sent into the Pentagon. A lot of things didn't go right that day for whatever reason, like the United States Air Force would have theoretically diverted these planes or shot them down while they were flying all of this way, passenger planes. But for whatever reason, our Air Force was in war games in Canada, and nobody came to stop these planes, which was strange and weird. It was devastating. It was a horrifying day. I was numb, sitting in my couch, crying and staring at the TV for days and days and days. Sad, sick inside. 2 planes slammed into the World Trade Center towers in New York City, which subsequently collapsed, as did Building 7, which was not actually hit by any planes, and yet mysteriously it crashes at 5 p.m. that afternoon, even though it had never been hit. And it fell at free fall speed. This is one of the most famous photos of that day. A lot of people that were way up here in the top of the buildings where they were on fire couldn't get out and couldn't get evacuated and had to decide between burning alive or suffocating or jumping to their deaths. And this is one of the most famous suicides of this man plummeting to the earth. This is the Pentagon, and the Pentagon was hit by a 3rd plane. What this guy who made the PowerPoint is apparently showing us is that if it were hit by a plane, why aren't there any wings? Why didn't the wings hit anything? I do agree with that. I don't know why that would be the case. So I'm not quite sure what happened with that. But there's no wings. 3rd plane slammed to the Pentagon. There should have been wings. And these windows aren't even broken. Those windows over here aren't even broken. And then in Pennsylvania, also mysteriously, there's no wreckage. You're looking at where the plane crashed, and this big hole. They didn't find jet aircraft engines. They didn't find anything. There's no wreckages. There's no people. There's no bones. There's no body parts. There's no anything. A 4th plane was aiming for the White House, but ultimately crashed in a Pennsylvania field. That's it. You're looking at it. But there's no sign that there was a plane, that was a big, huge passenger plane. There's no sign of it. That hasn't been cleaned up. That's it. So the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda was led by Osama bin Laden, was held responsible, although he denied responsibility for the attacks. He said in an interview that he would happily take credit for the attacks if he had done them because he is thrilled that it happened. He's very happy that this happened to America, who they consider the great Satan, if you remember, ever since the Iranian Revolution. Sorry, I had to put a cough drop in. And so he said he was happy that it happened, but he insists that he did not have anything to do with it. Osama bin Laden, I think around 2010 or 11, does go into, I think, Pakistan, and they kill the Army Rangers or somebody, Navy SEALs, somebody goes in and kills Osama bin Laden, who most believe is the architect for 9/11, the crimes against America. He denies it, but most people believe it was him. Bin Laden's hatred toward America revolved around resentment of America's economic, military, and cultural power, especially in the Middle East, and the U.S.'s unrelenting support for Israel. Remember, we are BFFs with Israel. We give them more money than pretty much every other country on earth. This is one of the most famous pictures on 9/11. The American mainland had never before been attacked like this. Almost 3,000 people had been killed. Hawaii had been attacked in Pearl Harbor, but that's not the mainland. Mainland is all the states that you guys memorized. That's not Alaska and Hawaii. And this speech that he gave on the rubble with the firefighters is one of the most famous presidential speeches in history. Most people felt very good about it, and he said that we are going to find these people and hunt them down and make them pay. Bush's leadership after the attacks was strong, and he called for a war on terror. His popularity rating soared to unprecedented levels. I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon. Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists. 1 month later, Bush orders the invasion of Afghanistan to capture bin Laden, destroy Al-Qaeda, and overthrow the Taliban leadership of that country. As you all know, we are still in Afghanistan ever since then in 2001, which now makes us 19 years later. It's the longest war in U.S. history. We found plenty on this guy: a concealed First Amendment, a suspicious freedom of assembly, a dubious freedom from unreasonable searches, and on and on and on. The U.S. Constitution. Congress passed the Patriot Act, giving the government extended surveillance rights in an attempt to foil future terrorist plots. Critics charge this as a big brother-like infringement of rights, that the government is, the Patriot Act takes a lot of rights away from American citizens. I believe that. There's a huge difference between legal programs, legitimate spying. This is Edward Snowden. And these programs of dragnet mass surveillance that put entire populations under an all-seeing eye and save copies forever. These programs were never about terrorism. They're about economic spying, social control, and diplomatic manipulation. They're about power. Edward Snowden, he's now exiled in Russia ever since this time. In 2013, Snowden exposed that the NSA was spying on American phone calls and emails in the hopes to detect terrorist threats, but it was a huge violation of privacy laws. As you guys all know, our phones now today, most of us concur that our phones hear everything. You guys think that too. They hear everything now. Now it's crazy now. We have given our rights away and our identities with our phones. The mission of the Office for Homeland Security was created. We created this department. The Department of Homeland Security was established as the newest cabinet department. Its goal is to secure the safety of Americans. That's after 9/11. The mission of the office will be to develop and coordinate the implementation of a comprehensive national strategy to secure the United States from terrorist threats or attacks. The office will coordinate the executive branch's efforts to detect, prepare for, prevent, protect against, respond to, and recover from terrorist attacks within the United States. In 2003, Bush began making the case to invade Iraq, claiming Hussein had links to Al-Qaeda. He had none. As a matter of fact, they hated each other. And that he had weapons of mass destruction. He did not. Even some other speech, Bush was making a joke out of looking for the weapons of mass destruction, and it fell flat. A lot of people were angry about it. Bush would not tolerate Hussein's defiance of UN weapons inspectors, but many questioned the necessity of us actually going to war against Iraq. We already went to war against Afghanistan, but they conflated it to make it seem like Iraq and Afghanistan had similar ideals and were similar, but they weren't the same at all. It's two entirely different countries. So we're theoretically looking for weapons of mass destruction. In March 2003, without United Nations approval and with limited international support, it means most other countries don't join this fight, Bush ordered the invasion of Iraq. Congress overwhelmingly supported his decision, which was Republican, mostly Republican. America is a friend of the people of Iraq. Our demands are directed only at the regime that enslaves them and threatens us. When these demands are met, the first and greatest benefit will come to Iraqi men, women, and children. However, most people believe more than 1 million Iraqi men, women, and children died as a result of our war against Iraq. Civilian casualties. And we toppled statues when we went in. Baghdad fell quickly, and Hussein was eventually found and executed by his own people for crimes against humanity. They found him in this hole in the ground where he was hiding, the leader of Iraq, the one that had invaded Kuwait when George H.W. Bush was president, and the Persian Gulf War was the result of that. And H.W. Bush kicked him back out of Kuwait. Taking Iraq was swift and successful, but securing and rebuilding Iraq proved tougher. They were trying to create it into a democracy in a country, in a region of the world where democracy was not the standard, and it was a lot more difficult than expected. Iraqi insurgents attacked U.S. troops, and rival factions fought each other for control of Iraq. Iraq held democratic elections in 2004. They would vote, and then you would have to dip your finger in ink after you voted so that they knew that you already voted and you couldn't vote twice. And in 2007, a surge of U.S. troops successfully quelled sectarian violence. Sectarian is about the Shiite and the Sunni Muslims who were part of Iraq but hated each other. For 1,000 years, they've hated each other. More than 1,000 years. The Iraq War divided America. Conservatives generally supported the war and post-war efforts, while liberals questioned Bush's motivations for and management of the war. That was me. I was entirely opposed. I went and picketed. I stood on the streets protesting about us going to Iraq. I did not want us to go to Iraq. Bush's authorization of enhanced questioning techniques like waterboarding with suspected terrorist detainees at Guantanamo Bay drew international anger. It was considered torture. This is waterboarding. They tip you back and they pour water over your nose and mouth, but your face is back and it feels like you're drowning. And we did that. In November 2011, Obama declared an end to war in Iraq. Almost 5,000 Americans had been killed, but no weapons of mass destruction or evidence or link to Al-Qaeda was ever discovered. War in Afghanistan continues still today. The Taliban have remained a threat to their democratically elected government. And in May 2011, Obama authorized this Navy SEAL CIA mission into Pakistan, which led to the killing of Osama bin Laden. The Obama years. Next.